do. We have the 3 Hail Marys and the prayers after every low Mass as we used to. Because, I don't think we believe that Russia has converted to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. You still have the leaders who are promoting communism, the principles of communism, so that hasn't changed. So we don't believe, by looking at the consequences or the effects in Russia today, we don't believe that they've converted at all, the leaders. And then because the communist machine is still there. They haven't changed their doctrine. So, yes, we pray for the souls, the conversion of Russia. Let's see. Should we make the sign of the cross when Mass is finished? Well, let's see. The laws of the church, the rubrics, do not add a sign of the cross at the end of Mass. So that's why the priest won't do it, because it's not part of the rubrics, the rule of the church. So we are not allowed to make up our own gestures of reverence on our own. That's because we're following the prayer of the church. We aren't allowed to add our own devotions to the prayers of the church. So first of all, that's why there is no sign of the cross at the end of Mass, because it's not prescribed by the church. So I'm not allowed to do that. Privately we are allowed, but it's not a rule then. So normally they should not add devotions or gestures for the liturgy of the church. That is not something you should do. Okay, so don't be adding this sign of the cross when Father finishes the last Gospel, because it's not prescribed, and we don't want to start adding acts of reverence that the church hasn't prescribed. So that's the principle there. So, and it's not prescribed that to make the sign of the cross before the 3 Hail Marys or after the prayers for the conversion of Russia. None of that is prescribed by the church, so there's no reason to have to do that. But if you want to make the sign of the cross on your own for prayers, privately you may do so. Like, for example, on High Mass day, when you come in for the sung Mass, it normally begins with the asperges. We sprinkle the sprinkling of the water. So normally, liturgically speaking, the faithful, when they come into the church, they are not supposed to take holy water and make the sign of the cross when you come into the church on a High Mass day, because the reason why you take holy water is to purify your soul for the liturgy, right? To receive the grace of God. Well, the church has actually incorporated that into the beginning of the High Mass with the sprinkling of the people with the holy water. So I remember Archbishop Lefebvre gave us his talk. He mentioned this to the seminarians in a home. He says, so liturgically speaking, when you seminarians come in, you're not supposed to be taking holy water and signing the cross before the High Mass, because the priest does that at the asperges or the vidiacqua. But then he says, but it's not a sin if you do. So he's balanced. But it's not liturgical. It's not correct. But it's not a sin if you do. So. Next question. What would have happened if the Blessed Virgin Mary had said no to the angel Gabriel at the Annunciation? Well, if she hadn't said no, then Christ would not have become flesh. Right? That's exactly what would have happened. So that's why we thank the Blessed Virgin Mary for saying, be it done unto me according to thy word. Right? But see, God knows all things from eternity. He wasn't waiting to see if Our Lady would say yes or no. Is she going to say yes? No. God knows from eternity whether or not she would have said yes. And because he foresaw that she was freely going to say yes, he incorporated that into the work of the redemption. God's grace does what it needs to do, but it does it freely. So thank you. We thank the Blessed Virgin Mary. Thank you, Mary, for saying yes. Right? That's what we should say every day. Do the souls that go to limbo stay there? Well, until the end of the world. Well, before Christ came, the limbo was the limbo of the just, was the waiting place in Abraham's bosom before Christ came to open the gates of heaven. So those souls in that limbo were released from limbo and they went into heaven on the day of the Ascension. But the limbo of those souls, referring to those souls who die without any personal sin, but don't have sanctifying grace because of original sin. Yes, that limbo, for those souls would exist for, as far as we know, forever, because no one can go to heaven without sanctifying grace. And if souls are in limbo without sanctifying grace, they die without sanctifying grace, but no actual sin, well, they can't see God face to face, because that's a supernatural gift of God, which requires sanctifying grace. But they won't go to hell of being punished because there's no personal sin. So that's why that's the doctrine of limbo, a state of perfect natural happiness, but not seeing God face to face. And that's, we don't know what other plans God may have, so we'll find out when we die. You know, if God has other plans. If God wants to send a special illumination of grace into the soul of that person before the judgment, God can do what he wants. If the little baby dies before baptism, God is the author of life and death. He can give grace to that baby and into the intellect before judgment for that baby to make a choice. But there's nothing clear in Revelation that God does that. Although, it seems to be indicated that maybe that is the case, because in the last gospel that we say every day at Mass, we read from the words of St. John, that Christ is a true light that has come into the world, and he enlightens every man that comes into the world. So at the moment of conception, the person begins his existence. So it seems that Christ does give an illumination to all souls in one way or the other before judgment. It seems to be indicated implicitly in the last gospel. We don't know. The church hasn't made any definition on that, so we can't teach it as a doctrine of the church. But like I've told other people before, a personal story that I remember, an older lady, she and her husband were at the Mass Center in northern Michigan, and she opened up one day and she started tears came into her eyes once again. She said that when she was first married, one of her first children was stillborn. And so the baby was born, but the baby was dead. So no baptism. And they were crying, and she was crying. She couldn't stop crying because she wanted her baby to be in heaven. I mean, she was a good Catholic girl, you know. And so she made a novena to St. Teresa of the Little Flower, you know, to please, St. Teresa, let me know if my baby is in heaven. Please send a sign somehow. I need to know. I mean, I can't live. I can't make it, as it were. So she prayed, and during that 9-day novena, out of nowhere, she received roses. Well, you know the story, that's a sign that St. Teresa has answered the prayer, that the answer is yes. So take it for what it's worth. You know, I think we can believe that privately, yeah, that God does something. He does provide a way, but church hasn't made any official doctrine on that point. So we have to be careful not to teach something the church doesn't teach. But I think you can hold that privately because it's a true story, right? Is it a grave sin to break a resolution to avoid a near occasion of sin? Let's say a person knows that by watching these bad movies, these bad DVDs, that is a mortal sin. Therefore, I've got to avoid watching these bad movies. If the person breaks the resolution, so in confession, Father says, you promise to do your very best not to put yourself in that danger of sin and rent those DVDs. Yes, Father, I won't do it again. Okay, 2 weeks later, he's tempted and he gives in, and he goes into that bad DVD shop and buys that video. Well, yes, it's going to be a mortal sin to put yourself willfully in the occasion of mortal sin. So strictly speaking, there are two sins. Because the person put himself without a necessity in that occasion of sin in which he knows he's going to commit a mortal sin. Or probably almost always will commit a mortal sin. So that's right. But you don't need to say that, oh, Father, I broke my resolution to put myself in the occasion of sin. Because once you say that I got a week ago, Father, I went to this bad video shop and bought a bad DVD. Well, we know you broke your resolution because you went there. But it's understood that the priest knows you committed two mortal sins. And that was sufficient to say it that way because we know that you did that. So that's why if you're playing with danger, you're kind of playing with the danger, but not like you're driving up and down the street, am I going to go into that store? You're tempting yourself to go in. Already that's a venial sin because you're putting yourself in the danger of giving in. So why make yourself weaker by keep going to that same danger where you might actually then park and go in the store, right? Same thing with going on a date. If you know that by being in this certain place or that apartment or staying too long in the car talking, that is going to be an occasion of sin. Well, then to kind of play with that danger, walk in, well, I can't go into your house today. Maybe I can walk in just a little bit, open the door and you step inside. I come a little farther. Can I see what kind of TV do you have? You see, you're playing with danger, right? So already there's a venial sin to kind of start going in, playing with the danger. So let us avoid any kind of danger that we know will perhaps lead us into sin.